The radio crackled with static, then died. Complete silence. In the operations center at Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, 23 pairs of eyes locked onto the same frequency display. Empty. The kind of empty that makes seasoned combat controllers stop breathing. Captain Nora Vance, call sign Widow, had been transmitting coordinates for a danger-close gun run 30 seconds ago. Her A-10 Thunderbolt had been orbiting a contested valley where a SEAL team was pinned down by insurgent fire. Now there was nothing. No mayday, no transponder, just the hollow hiss of dead air where a pilot's voice should be. The mission commander, Colonel Derek Haas, leaned forward in his chair, jaw tight. He'd seen this before. Radio silence in combat usually meant one of two things: catastrophic systems failure or catastrophic everything else. But Widow wasn't just any pilot. She was the one they doubted from day one. The one who'd flown more combat sorties than half the squadron combined, but still got the side-eye in every briefing room. Not because she wasn't good. Because she was a woman flying the ugly, slow, heavily armored beast that everyone said was obsolete. And now she was gone. The valley below had been a meat grinder since dawn. 12 Navy SEALs, call sign Reaper 6, were dug into a rocky hillside, surrounded on 3 sides by Taliban fighters who'd been waiting for them. The ambush was textbook. Mortars, machine guns, and at least 2 DSHK heavy weapons tearing apart their position. They'd called for air support an hour ago. 2 F-16s had made passes but couldn't get low enough through the anti-aircraft fire. Too fast, too high, too clean. Then Widow had volunteered. She always did. The A-10 wasn't pretty, it wasn't sleek. It was a flying tank built around a 7-barrel Gatling gun that could shred armor from a mile away. Widow flew it like an extension of her own body. Low, slow, lethal. She'd come in under the cloud deck, wings heavy with Maverick missiles and a full load of 30mm rounds. Her voice over the radio had been calm, almost bored. "Reaper 6, Widow, I've got your position, marking targets now." The SEAL team leader, a grizzled operator named Ethan Cross, had felt something loosen in his chest when he heard her voice. He didn't care who was flying. He just needed someone willing to get dirty. Widow had made her first pass at 300 feet, low enough to see the muzzle flashes. The A-10's gun had roared, a sound like God tearing canvas. 30mm rounds walked across the ridgeline, shredding rock and flesh. She'd banked hard, her aircraft shuddering under the G-forces, and come around for a second run. That's when the radio went silent. Colonel Haas stared at the empty screen. The SEALs were still in contact, still dying. And the only pilot crazy enough to help them had just vanished into the mountains. He reached for the mic, knowing the words before he said them. "All stations, this is Bagram Actual. We have a pilot down. I say again, pilot down." But even as he spoke, something told him this story wasn't over. Not yet. The A-10 Thunderbolt has a nickname, Warthog. It's not a compliment. The aircraft is ugly, with a bulbous nose, straight wings, and twin turbofan engines mounted high on the fuselage to keep them away from ground fire. It's slow compared to modern jets, maxing out around 350 knots. But it's built for one thing: survival. Titanium bathtub armor surrounds the cockpit. Redundant flight controls. Engines that can keep running even after taking hits. It's the kind of plane that refuses to die, and the pilots who fly it are cut from the same cloth. Nora Vance had learned to fly in rural Montana, where her father ran a crop dusting service. She'd soloed at 16, joined the Air Force at 18, and spent the next decade proving she belonged. The A-10 community was small, tight-knit, and skeptical of outsiders. Women even more so. When she'd arrived at her first squadron, the jokes had started immediately. Widow wasn't a call sign she'd chosen. It was given to her after a training exercise where she'd killed 3 enemy fighters in a simulated dogfight, something A-10s weren't supposed to be able to do. The name stuck, but the respect didn't. Not at first. She'd flown her first combat mission in Iraq, covering a Marine convoy that had driven into an ambush. The ground commander had radioed for air support, and Widow had arrived in minutes. She'd made 5 gun runs, expending every round, then stayed on station with her targeting pod to guide an artillery. The Marines had made it out, all of them. When she landed, her crew chief found 11 bullet holes in the airframe. She hadn't mentioned it in her debrief. That was 10 years ago. Now she was in Afghanistan, flying the same mission with the same doubts following her. Even after 147 combat sorties, even after 3 distinguished flying crosses, there were still officers who questioned whether she should be in the cockpit. Colonel Haas was one of them. He'd never said it out loud, but Widow could see it in his eyes every time he signed off on her flight plan. He thought she was good. He just didn't think she was good enough. And now she was missing. The SEALs on the ground didn't know what had happened. One moment, Widow's A-10 had been overhead, raining fire on the enemy positions. The next, silence. Ethan Cross pressed himself against the rocks, his rifle hot in his hands. Blood streaked his face from a shrapnel wound above his left eye. 2 of his men were down, one unconscious from a mortar blast, the other gut-shot and fatting fast. They needed medevac. They needed it now. But first, they needed the enemy off their backs. Cross keyed his radio, voice hoarse. Any station, Reaper 6. We've lost contact with Widow. Request immediate CAS support. How copy? The response came from Bagram, clipped and professional. Reaper 6, stand by. We're working the problem. Working the problem. Military speak, for we don't know what the hell happened either. Cross cursed under his breath and fired another burst at a Taliban fighter trying to flank their position. The mountains around him were crawling with hostiles, and his team was out of time. Then he heard it, faint at first, almost lost in the chaos of gunfire. A low, guttural rumble, the sound of turbofan engines. Cross looked up, squinting through the dust and smoke. There, barely 100 feet above the valley floor, was the A-10. One engine was trailing black smoke, and the right wing had a jagged hole punched through it, but it was flying, and more importantly, it was still in the fight. Widow's voice crackled over the radio, strained but steady. Reaper 6, Widow. My radios went down. I'm back on backup. Tell me what you need. Cross felt something break inside him, relief, gratitude, maybe a little awe. He'd seen a lot of pilots in his career. Most of them were good, some were great. But this woman flying a half-destroyed aircraft back into a hot zone was something else entirely. He keyed his mic, voice tight. Widow, we need fire on the ridgeline 200 meters north of our position. Heavy weapons and infantry. Danger close. There was a pause. Then Widow's voice, calm as ever. Copy, 200 meters north, danger close, I'm rolling in. The A-10 banked left, its damaged wing dipping toward the ground. From the valley floor, it looked like the aircraft was barely holding together. The right engine was still smoking, and the fuselage bore scorch marks from what must have been a surface-to-air missile. But Widow didn't hesitate. She lined up her approach, sighting through her heads-up display, fingers resting on the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon is one of the most devastating weapons ever mounted on an aircraft. 7 barrels, 30 millimeters, firing depleted uranium rounds at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. When it fires, the sound is unmistakable, a deep, resonant brrrrt that echoes off mountains and makes the ground shake. Widow squeezed the trigger. The gun roared. The A-10 shuddered, its nose dipping from the recoil. On the ridgeline, the earth erupted. Dust, rock, and bodies flew into the air as the rounds tore through the Taliban positions. The heavy machine gun that had been pinning down the SEALs disintegrated in a shower of sparks. Widow pulled up hard, her aircraft groaning, and banked for another pass. Cross watched, transfixed. He'd seen A-10s work before, but never like this. Never this close, this precise, this absolutely fearless. She made 3 more runs, each one lower than the last. Her right engine finally gave out on the 4th pass, the turbine seizing with a metallic shriek. The A-10 yawed hard to the left, and for a moment it looked like she was going down. But Widow compensated, throttling up the left engine, and managed to level out. She was flying on one engine now, in a combat zone, with a damaged wing and probably a dozen other systems failures she hadn't mentioned. And she still wasn't leaving. Cross keyed his radio. Widow, you need to RTB, you're flying on fumes. Her response was immediate. Reaper 6, I'm not leaving until you're clear. How's that medevac looking? Cross glanced at his wounded men. The unconscious one was breathing barely. The gutshot operator had stopped moaning, which was either a good sign or a very bad one. Medevac's 10 minutes out, we can hold. Widow's voice softened just a fraction. Then I'll hold with you. For the next 10 minutes, Widow orbited the valley at 200 feet, her crippled A-10 barely holding altitude. She didn't fire again, she was out of ammunition, but she stayed. Her presence alone was enough. The Taliban fighters, seeing the warthog still in the air, decided they'd had enough. They melted back into the hills, dragging their dead with them. By the time the medevac helicopter arrived, the valley was quiet. Cross and his team loaded their wounded and climbed aboard. As the helicopter lifted off, Cross looked back at the A-10, still circling, still watching. He keyed the frequency one last time. "Widow, Reaper 6, we're clear, thank you." There was a long pause, then Widow's voice, tired but firm. "Get your boys home, Reaper, I'll see you on the ground." The helicopter banked east toward Bagram. Behind it, the A-10 turned north, trailing smoke, and disappeared into the mountains. Cross didn't know if she'd make it back, but if anyone could, it was her. At Bagram, the operations center was pandemonium. Reports were flooding in from every asset in the area. Satellite imagery showed the A-10's transponder moving north at 150 knots, altitude dropping. The aircraft was losing power. Colonel Haas stood at the main display, hands clenched behind his back. He'd ordered 2 Apache helicopters to intercept and provide escort, but they were still 15 minutes out. Too far, too slow. One of the junior officers, a lieutenant named Parker, turned from his console. "Sir, she's not going to make it to Bagram, not on one engine." Haas didn't answer. He was watching the altitude readout, 8,000 feet, 7,006. The A-10 was descending fast, but it wasn't tumbling. She still had control. That was something. The radio operator keyed his mic, voice tense. "Widow, Bagram actual, what's your status?" Static. Then Widow's voice, barely audible. "Bagram, Widow. Left engines overheating. Hydraulics are failing. I'm going to try for a controlled descent, but I might need to punch out. Punch out. Eject." In an A-10, that meant a rocket-powered seat that would send her clear of the aircraft. But at low altitude in mountainous terrain, it was a coin flip whether she'd survive the parachute landing. Haas grabbed the mic himself. "Widow, this is Colonel Haas. Do not eject unless absolutely necessary. We have assets en route to your position. Just keep her in the air." There was a long silence. Then Widow's voice, strained but edged with something that might have been humor. "Copy that, sir. I'll do my best." Haas set the mic down, jaw tight. He'd never liked Widow, never trusted her. She was too aggressive, too willing to take risks. He'd written her up twice for unauthorized low-level flights during training. But right now, watching her fight to keep that broken aircraft in the air, he felt something shift. Respect, maybe, or something close to it. He turned to Parker. "Get me a direct line to search and rescue. If she goes down, I want boots on the ground in under 5 minutes." Parker nodded and got to work. On the display, the A-10's transponder blinked steadily, moving north. 5,000 feet. 4, 3. Haas watched, holding his breath. The A-10's cockpit was a nightmare. Warning lights covered the instrument panel like Christmas decorations. The left engine was redlining, temperature gauges pegged in the danger zone. Hydraulic pressure was dropping fast, which meant Widow was losing control of her flight surfaces. She had maybe 5 minutes before the aircraft became unflyable, maybe less. She scanned the terrain below, looking for options. The mountains were unforgiving, steep, rocky, and covered in sparse vegetation. No clear areas for a belly landing. No roads. No flat ground, just jagged peaks and narrow valleys. If she ejected here, she'd be lucky to land without breaking both legs. And even if she survived the landing, she'd be miles from help in hostile territory. Not ideal. Widow keyed her radio, voice steady despite the alarms screaming in her ears. "Bagram, Widow, I've got a visual on a dry lake bed bearing 045. I'm going to try to put her down there." Haas's voice came back immediately. "Widow, we're reading high terrain in that area. Are you sure you can make it?" Widow glanced at the altimeter. 2,000 feet. The lake bed was at least 3 miles away, and she was losing altitude fast. She did the math in her head. Glide ratio, wind speed, engine thrust. It was going to be close, very close, but the alternative was ejecting into the mountains and hopping for the best. She'd take her chances with the lake bed. "Bagram, Widow, I'm committed. Stand by." She pushed the throttle forward, coaxing every last bit of power from the dying engine. The A-10 shuddered, nose dipping, and began its final descent. Below her, the lakebed came into view, a flat, dusty expanse about a mile long. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Widow adjusted her approach, bleeding off speed, and lowered the landing gear manually. The hydraulic system was gone, so the gear came down with a heavy clunk, locked by gravity alone. She lined up with the lakebed, her hands steady on the stick. 1 mile, half a mile, quarter mile. The ground rushed up to meet her. Widow pulled back on the stick, flaring the nose, and the A-10 slammed into the dirt. The landing gear took the impact, but barely. The right strut collapsed immediately, and the aircraft skidded sideways, carving a trench through the lakebed. Dust exploded around the cockpit, blinding her. The A-10 skidded for 300 yards before finally lurching to a stop. The left engine was on fire, black smoke pouring from the nacelle. Widow didn't waste time. She yanked the canopy release, popped her harness, and hauled herself out of the cockpit. Her legs nearly gave out when she hit the ground, adrenaline and exhaustion catching up all at once, but she forced herself to move. The fire was spreading. She staggered away from the wreckage, coughing from the smoke, and collapsed in the dirt 50 yards away. Her hands were shaking. Her ears were ringing, but she was alive. She keyed her survival radio, voice hoarse. "Bagram Widow, I'm on the ground. Aircraft is totaled, but I'm okay." Haas's voice came back, sharp with relief. "Widow, good copy. Search and rescue is en route. ETA 10 minutes. Stay put and stay safe." Widow laughed, a short, breathless sound. "Stay safe. Right." She was sitting in the middle of Taliban country with a smoking wreck behind her. But she'd made it. Against all odds, she'd made it. The Apache helicopters arrived 8 minutes later, rotors thumping low over the mountains. They circled the lakebed once, confirming Widow's position, then a U-60 Black Hawk dropped in behind them. The helicopter landed in a cloud of dust, and 2 pararescue jumpers sprinted toward Widow. She waved them off, standing on her own. "I'm fine. Just get me out of here." They didn't argue. One of them helped her to the Black Hawk while the other grabbed her survival gear. Within minutes they were airborne, the burning wreckage of the shrinking below them. Widow leaned back against the webbing, eyes closed. Her body ached. Her hands were still trembling, but she'd done it. She'd saved the SEAL team. She'd brought her aircraft down in one piece, and she'd survived. One of the PJs leaned over, offering a bottle of water. "Hell of a landing, ma'am." Widow took the water, sipped it, and managed a tired smile. "Thanks. Remind me never to do that again." The PJ grinned. "Roger that." When the Black Hawk touched down at Bagram, half the squadron was waiting on the tarmac. Word had spread fast. Widow had flown a combat mission on one engine, saved a SEAL team, and crash-landed in hostile territory without ejecting. It was the kind of story that would be told in ready rooms for years. Colonel Haas was there too, standing off to the side with his arms crossed. When Widow climbed out of the helicopter, exhausted and covered in dust, he walked over. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Haas extended his hand. "Good work, Captain." Widow stared at his hand, surprised. Then she took it. "Thank you, sir." Haas nodded, his expression unreadable. "You saved 12 lives today, that matters." He turned and walked away, leaving Widow standing on the tarmac. She watched him go, something tight in her chest loosening. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close. But it was a start. One of her fellow pilots, a major named Carter, jogged over and clapped her on the shoulder. "You're insane, you know that?" Widow grinned. "Yeah, I know." The debrief took hours. Widow sat in a sterile conference room, recounting every detail of the mission while a team of intelligence officers took notes. The surface-to-air missile that had damaged her aircraft, the radio failure, the gun runs, the crash landing. She left nothing out. When she finished, the lead intelligence officer, a stern-faced woman named Major Ellis, leaned back in her chair. "Captain Vance, you understand that what you did today was far outside normal operating parameters." Widow met her gaze evenly. "Yes, ma'am." Ellis paused, then nodded. "Good, because we're recommending you for the Silver Star." The room went silent. Widow blinked, processing. The Silver Star, the third highest military decoration for valor. She'd seen them pinned on chests at ceremonies, heard the stories of the pilots who'd earned them, but she'd never imagined earning one herself. "Thank you, ma'am," she said quietly. Ellis's expression softened just a fraction. "You earned it, Captain." Dismissed. Widow stood, saluted, and walked out of the conference room in a daze. The Silver Star, for her. That night Widow sat alone in her quarters, staring at the wall. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving her hollow and shaky. Her hands still trembled when she tried to hold a cup of coffee. She kept replaying the mission in her head. The sound of the explosion when the missile hit, the gut-wrenching moment when her radio died, the SEAL team's desperate calls for help. She'd made the right call, she knew that, but it had been close. So close. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Ethan Cross standing there, still in his combat fatigues. His face was bruised and he had a bandage over his left eye, but he was smiling. "Captain Vance," Widow nodded. "That's me." Cross extended his hand. "I'm Ethan Cross, Reaper 6. I just wanted to say thank you. You saved my team today." Widow shook his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm. "Just doing my job," Cross shook his head. "No, you went way beyond that. My men are alive because of you." "I won't forget that." They talked for a while, standing in the doorway. Cross told her about his team, about the ambush, about the moment he'd heard her A-10 come back over the valley. "I thought you were gone," he admitted. "When the radio went dead, I thought that was it." Widow smiled faintly. "Yeah, me too." Cross studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're a hell of a pilot, Captain. I'd fly with you any day." He saluted and walked away, leaving Widow standing in the doorway. She watched him go, feeling something warm settle in her chest. Respect, recognition. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She closed the door and sat back down, the ghost of a smile still on her lips. Maybe she'd earned more than a medal today. Maybe she'd earned something that mattered more. The next morning, the story had already spread across the base. Pilots, ground crew, support staff, everyone knew about Widow's mission. When she walked into the chow hall for breakfast, conversation stopped. Heads turned. And then someone started clapping. It started slow, hesitant, then built into a wave. One person, then 5, then 20. Soon the entire chow hall was on its feet, applauding. Widow froze, heat rising in her cheeks. She wasn't used to this. She'd spent her entire career being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. And now suddenly she was the center of attention. Major Carter pushed through the crowd and handed her a tray. "Come on, Widow. Let's get you some food before this turns into a circus." Widow took the tray gratefully and followed him to a table. But even as she sat down, she could feel the eyes on her. The respect, the admiration, it was overwhelming. Carter leaned across the table, grinning. "Get used to it, you're a legend now." Widow shook her head. "I'm just a pilot," Carter laughed. "No, you're the pilot who flew a combat mission on one engine and lived to tell about it. That's not just a pilot, that's a badass." Widow couldn't help but smile. Over the next few weeks, the story took on a life of its own. Pilots from other squadrons came by to meet her. Ground crews asked her to sign patches. Even the SEALs sent her a bottle of whiskey with a handwritten note. "To Widow, you've got more guts than the rest of us combined." Reaper 6. The Silver Star ceremony was held on a sunny afternoon in late spring. Widow stood at attention on the tarmac, her dress uniform crisp and clean. Colonel Haas read the citation aloud, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States." Widow barely heard the words. She was thinking about the mission, about the SEALs, about the A-10 burning on a lakebed in the mountains. When Haas pinned the medal to her chest, he leaned in and spoke quietly. "I was wrong about you, Captain. You're one of the best pilots I've ever served with." Widow met his eyes, surprised. "Thank you, sir." Haas stepped back and saluted. Widow returned the salute, feeling something shift inside her. Vindication, validation, proof. But the story didn't end there. 3 months later, Widow was reassigned to a training squadron in Nevada. Her job was to teach the next generation of A-10 pilots how to fly low, fly slow, and survive. She was good at it, better than good. She taught them everything she knew, how to read the terrain, how to manage risk, how to trust their instincts. And she told them the truth. The A-10 isn't the fastest plane, it isn't the prettiest, but it's the toughest. And if you treat it with respect, it'll bring you home. One of her students, a young lieutenant named Hayes, raised her hand. "Ma'am, is it true you flew a mission on one engine?" Widow smiled. "It is." Hayes leaned forward, eyes bright. "What was it like?" Widow thought for a moment. "Terrifying, exhilarating, the most important thing I've ever done." She paused, then added, "And I'd do it again in a heartbeat." The students exchanged glances, awed. Widow saw herself in their faces, young, eager, determined to prove themselves. She knew what they'd face: the doubts, the skepticism, the constant pressure to be perfect. She also knew they'd make it, because they had something she'd fought for her entire career, proof that it could be done. That women could fly combat missions, that they could excel, that they could save lives. After class, Hayes lingered behind. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Widow nodded. "Of course." Hayes hesitated, then spoke. "Do you ever regret it, pushing so hard, flying those missions, dealing with all the doubt?" Widow considered the question. Did she regret it? The long hours, the skepticism, the constant need to prove herself. The answer came easily. "No, not for a second." Hayes smiled, relieved. "Good, because I want to be like you." Widow felt something warm settle in her chest. "Then don't be like me, be better." Hayes nodded, determination in her eyes. "Yes, ma'am." She saluted and left. Widow watched her go, thinking about the future, about the pilots who'd come after her, about the legacy she was building, one mission at a time. Years later, Widow retired from the Air Force as a lieutenant colonel. She'd flown over 300 combat sorties, trained dozens of pilots, and earned more medals than she could count. But when people asked her about her career, she always came back to the same mission. The one where her radio died. The one where she flew on one engine. The one where she saved 12 lives and proved once and for all that she belonged. She kept the silver star in a small wooden box on her desk. Sometimes late at night she'd take it out and hold it, remembering the roar of the GAU-8, the smoke trailing from her engine, the SEALs' voices on the radio, the feeling of the A-10 slamming into the lakebed, and she'd smile, because she'd done something that mattered. She'd saved lives, she'd flown into hell and come back. And in doing so, she'd opened the door for every woman who came after her. That was her legacy, not the medals, not the stories, the knowledge that she'd made a difference. The final chapter of Widow's story was written not by her, but by the pilots she trained. Lieutenant Hayes went on to fly combat missions in Syria, earning her own Silver Star. Captain Reyes became an instructor, passing on Widow's lessons to the next generation. Major Kim was the first woman to command an A-10 squadron. They all credited Widow as their inspiration. At a reunion 20 years after that fateful mission, the surviving members of Reaper 6 gathered to honor her. Ethan Cross, now a grizzled veteran with silver hair, stood at a podium and told the story of the day Widow saved his team. "I've worked with a lot of pilots," Cross said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I've never met anyone like Captain Vance. She flew into hell for us. She stayed when any sane person would have left, and she brought us home." He turned to Widow, who was sitting in the front row, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't just save our lives that day. You reminded us what it means to be a warrior. Thank you." The room erupted in applause. Widow stood, overwhelmed, and shook Cross's hand. They embraced, two warriors who'd faced death together and lived to tell about it. After the ceremony, Widow stood outside, looking up at the sky. It was clear and blue, the kind of sky she'd flown through 1,000 times. She thought about the A-10, still her favorite aircraft. She thought about the missions, the fear, the adrenaline. And she thought about the legacy she'd left behind. A legacy of courage, of determination, of refusing to accept limits. She smiled, feeling the wind on her face, and whispered to the sky, "Wings torn, but mission done." And somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, the wreckage of her A-10 still lay on that dusty lakebed, a monument to the pilot who wouldn't quit. A reminder that sometimes the most important victories are the ones no one thought possible. Widow's story became legend. It was taught in Air Force academies, discussed in tactical briefings, and retold in ready rooms around the world. But for Widow, it was simpler than that. She'd done her job, she'd saved lives, and she'd proven once and for all that she belonged in the cockpit. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The radio had stayed dead for only a moment. But in that moment, Widow had shown the world what she was made of. And when her A-10 called back, "Wings torn but mission done," it wasn't just a report. It was a promise. A promise that no matter what, she'd bring her people home. That promise lived on in every pilot she trained, every mission she flew, every life she saved. And when Widow finally closed her eyes for the last time decades later, surrounded by family and friends, Her final thought was a simple one. She'd done it. She'd lived a life that mattered, she'd made a difference. And that, more than any medal or accolade, was the greatest victory of all. The sky had been her home, the A-10 had been her partner, and the mission, always the mission, had been her purpose. Wings torn but mission done, always.